I want to start with a question, a really tough one, that kind of gets at the core of who we are. It pits our best intentions against our most basic instinct for survival. The question is this: are you obligated to be a hero? All right, to really get a handle on this, I want you to picture something with me. Just go with me here. Imagine you're walking down a street, any street. Maybe you're heading home, grabbing a coffee, just a completely normal day. And then, all of a sudden, it's not normal anymore. You smell it first, that unmistakable smell of smoke. Then you see it, flames just pouring out of a building's windows. It's total chaos. People are yelling, running away from the scene. But then, through all that noise, you hear something else, a sound that just cuts right through the chaos and stops you in your tracks. It's a child, screaming from inside that burning building. And you think to yourself, you're able-bodied, you're strong, maybe, just maybe, you could get in there and get them out. So what do? That's the question that just hits you like a ton of bricks. Do you have to go in? I mean, is it your duty? And if you don't, does that make you a bad person? Or does it just mean you're not a hero? So that's the core dilemma we're going to unpack today. We'll start by trying to draw a clear moral line between what's required and what's just admirable. Then we'll look at the idea that maybe heroism is always optional, but then we'll poke some holes in that with situations where you kind of have to act. After that, we'll look at things like risk and your role in society to get a better handle on it. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by figuring out how you can find your own line. All right, so first things first. Before we can even really dig into that question, we've got to get our terms straight. Because morally speaking, there's a huge difference between something we think is amazing and something we think is required. Okay, so take a look at this. It really breaks it down. On one side, you've got your basic duty. This is your moral baseline, right? This stuff you must do. Think of it like the bare minimum rules of being a decent person. If you don't do it, like say you steal something, you get blamed. But then on the other side, you have heroism. This is totally different. This is going way beyond the rules, often with some serious personal risk involved. And that's exactly why we praise heroes, right? Because they did something awesome that no one could have forced them to do. It was a gift. Getting this distinction is, well, it's everything for this conversation. So that idea leads us to a pretty powerful argument. The idea that heroism, just by what it is, has to be optional. Let's dive into that for a minute. Now, the core of this whole argument boils down to a fancy-sounding word, supererogatory. It's a mouthful, I know, but all it means is going above and beyond the call of duty. And the thinking here is that morality just can't demand that you take some huge life-threatening risk. I mean, that would be an incredibly high bar, right? To say someone's a bad person because they didn't risk their own life. So from this point of view, not being a hero doesn't make you bad. It just makes you, ordinary. And it makes sense, doesn't it? The whole reason we praise heroes is because they didn't have to do it. It was a free choice, a gift they gave. Okay, so that sounds pretty clean, right? Case closed. You don't have to run into the burning building. You're off the hook. But, come on, is it really that simple? Because I think we all have this other gut feeling, right? A feeling that pulls us in the complete opposite direction. That little voice that says, no, sometimes you absolutely have to step up and help, even if it feels like a big deal. So let's switch up the scenario. Forget the burning building for a second. Imagine this. You're walking past a little park, there's a shallow pond, and you see a toddler has fallen in and is struggling. They're drowning. You can, without a doubt, wade in and pull them out. The absolute worst thing that happens to you is you ruin a pair of expensive shoes and get your pants muddy. Now in that situation, it feels totally different, doesn't it? The answer is just obvious. You must help. If you just stood there and walked away because you didn't want to mess up your clothes, well, I think we can all agree that would be seriously, fundamentally wrong. And this classic example shows us something really important. When the cost to you is tiny and the benefit to someone else is literally life or death, helping isn't optional anymore. It's an obligation. So now we're stuck, right? We've got these two powerful ideas pulling at us. On one hand, heroism feels like it has to be optional. On the other, the drowning child scenario shows us that sometimes helping is mandatory. So how do we put these two pieces together? Well, what we need is a better framework, one that can handle all the messy details, like risk, our roles in life, and just reality.
And this is where the idea of a spectrum of risk comes in, and it's super helpful. It's not a black and white thing, it's a sliding scale. So down at one end, you have low risk. Think, calling 911. The benefit is huge, the cost to you is basically zero. That's a clear duty. Way up at the other end is high risk, like almost certain death. That's obviously optional heroism. And our burning building? That's right in the middle, in that messy, moderate risk gray zone. And that's exactly why it's such a hard question.
Okay, but wait, there's another piece to this puzzle: your role. Who you are and what you do for a living can completely change the equation. For you, or me, an ordinary bystander, our obligations are one thing. But for a firefighter, it's literally their job. They chose a profession where they voluntarily accept a higher level of risk. So for them, running into that building isn't some super heroic choice, it's their professional duty. What's heroic for us is just Tuesday for them. But even for them, there's a limit, right? No one expects them to go on a suicide mission with zero chance of success. All right, let's pull all these threads together. What does all this philosophy actually mean for us? For regular people just trying to do the right thing in a world that can get pretty complicated. Well, it leads us to a pretty balanced and common sense idea. It's called the minimal duty of rescue. And basically, it just says that, yes, all of us have an obligation to help when it's reasonable, when it's pretty safe and isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg. This is our moral floor, our baseline. It's making that 911 call. It's wading into that shallow pond. And what's so great about this idea is that it lets us see heroism for what it really is. It's not some baseline requirement that we all fail to meet. It's a gift. It's an extraordinary, beautiful thing that some people choose to give. And we should be in awe of it for that very reason. Not because it's some standard we're all supposed to live up to. So as we wrap up, I just want to leave you with a couple of things to chew on. Thinking about that whole spectrum of risk we talked about, where do you draw the line? At what point does something stop being a must-do and cross over into heroic territory for you? And maybe a more personal question. Have you ever looked back on a tough situation in your own life and beat yourself up for not being more of a hero? For not meeting some impossible standard? Maybe thinking about it this way gives you a little bit of a different perspective. And finally, maybe this is the most important question of all. Let's forget about the burning buildings and dramatic rescues for a second. What kind of ordinary courage can you practice in your day-to-day life? The small stuff. The things that aren't going to get you a medal, but are still deeply important. And, just maybe, make the world a tiny bit better.